Hey guys, tonight we begin with the not-so-thrilling tale of a boy named Ashoka, born into the gilded uncertainty of an ancient palace somewhere in 3rd century BCE India. The candles flicker, the sandals squeak on marble floors, and you, as young Ashoka, are already realizing this royal gig might not be all that relaxing. There's drama jealousy, and the distinct impression that someone in the family is probably plotting to poison your curry. You're a middle child in the powerful Maurya dynasty born to Emperor Bindusara. Your grandfather is Chandragupta Maurya, the founder of the empire and a real overachiever who conquered most of the Indian subcontinent. Big shoes to fill, huh? Unfortunately, your father Bindusara doesn't make succession plans clear, and with at least a dozen half-brothers, the whole family tree is basically one sword fight away from a reality show. You aren't the heir. In fact, depending on the source, you're somewhere around the 3rd or 4th pick, not exactly the golden child. But you are bright, ruthless, and just the right amount of charismatic sociopath. Even the court astrologers say you have a destiny soaked in drama. Maybe a touch too soaked. Historians still argue whether your mother Subhadrangi was a noblewoman, a barber's daughter, or a clever mix of both. What they do agree on, you weren't born in the spotlight. You clawed your way into it. As a teenager, you get sent to manage the unruly province of Ujjain, a distant outpost with more bandits than etiquette. You quickly establish yourself not by charm, but by being the guy who gets things done. Things in this case often mean executions taxes and crushing rebellions before breakfast. Your war resume begins to bulk up. So does your ego. Back home, your brothers are busy either scheming or being boring. But you're racking up victories and rumors. The nobles start whispering, maybe Ashoka isn't just the spiky, violent middle child. Maybe he's the one. Your rise to power isn't a peaceful promotion. After the death of your father, you reportedly eliminate several half-brothers to secure the throne. Not with tactful diplomacy, but with the political equivalent of a lawnmower. There's even talk that your coronation involved a brief civil war and a very bloody siege of Pataliputra, the imperial capital. But let's be honest, you're now emperor. It worked. You take the throne around 268 BCE, young and ambitious, with a head full of conquest plans and 0 meditation apps installed. And oh, do you plan to expand the empire? Back at court, things are weirdly quiet. The marble corridors are cleaned of traitors. Your surviving brothers either vanish, retire, or develop hobbies like becoming monks. You're seated on a throne, flanked by golden lions, looking at a map where everything not shaded Maurya green looks like your to-do list. Now, here's the cheeky part. Despite the bloodshed, you're actually pretty decent at ruling. You streamline taxes, invest in infrastructure, and promote trade. You're basically the CEO of ancient India, but with better jewelry and more dramatic statues. But there's tension. There's always tension. The Kalinga region to the east remains independent. They're proud, fierce, and apparently not a fan of your brand of empire. You see them not as a sovereign state, but as a strategic inconvenience. You begin sketching battle plans. You instruct your generals to prepare the war elephants. The advisors nod. The scribes get busy. And somewhere in the palace courtyard, a very confused elephant trainer is told to start practicing polite bows. Meanwhile, you still not a Buddhist, still not enlightened, pace your halls like a caged tiger. You dream of glory, not peace, of conquest, not compassion. The empire expands with each breath, and yet under the weight of gold and power you can already feel something itchy, like an invisible robe of guilt you haven't earned yet. Quirky fact for tonight, you reportedly had a special torture chamber called Ashoka's Hell, designed to look like a palace from the outside, but inside, yikes. Think boiling pots and creative screams. Historians still argue whether it ever actually existed or was a medieval smear campaign. But if it was fake, it fooled a lot of anxious advisors. Still, it's a deliciously eerie image, an emperor with a death parlor disguised as a pleasure dome, sipping mango juice, while the chamber below simmers. Very on brand for Ashoka the Fierce. And that's who you are for now, not the peaceful monk king people revere, but the prequel version. The violent ambition, the troubled genius, the storm before the stillness. But the stillness, it's coming. And it begins on a battlefield where even the elephants weep. You don't sleep well the night before invading Kalinga. Not because of nerves please your Ashoka, but because the royal elephant stable is directly under your bedroom, and one of them has a sinus problem. You make a note to move the stables. Or the bedroom, or the elephant, or all three. The year is roughly 260 BCE. Kalinga is the last major territory not under Mauryan control, and it sits annoyingly on the eastern coast, right where your trade ambitions want to bloom. The people of Kalinga are fierce independent and absolutely not interested in becoming part of your empire. Naturally, you decide to fix that. So you assemble an army. Not a weekend skirmish type either. We're talking hundreds of thousands of soldiers' cavalry and about 700 war elephants, each one armored like a tank and decorated like a festival float. You Ashoka are not just coming to conquer, you're coming to parade. The battle is savage. No, seriously, it's bad, even by ancient standards. The Kalinga people fight like cornered wolves. The terrain is unfamiliar, the resistance intense, and the casualties horrific. The rivers run red, the trees are splintered, and even your seasoned officers look a little nauseous. You win. Of course you do. You're the emperor with a god-tier army and an elephant named Precious Doom, probably stomping people by accident, but something's off. You walk through the battlefield after the final clash. The crows beat you there. Smoke clings to the earth like it's mourning. Bodies, civilians, soldiers, horses are strewn like fallen leaves. A child clutches her mother's hand, frozen in mud. Somewhere nearby, a monk burns incense over a pile of limbs. And for the first time in your aggressively violent life, your stomach turns. You don't speak. You don't rage. You just stand there in your golden armor and listen to the wind howl through the silence you made. This wasteland is the price of victory. You go back to Pataliputra victorious and utterly hollow. Historians still argue whether the horror of Kalinga truly changed you, or if it was a slow evolution cleverly wrapped in a single dramatic event. But the records do agree on this after Kalinga. You stop being Ashoka the Fierce. You start becoming Ashoka the Just. You begin reading more, listening to philosophers, inviting monks into court. One of them, a serene figure with dry humor and unflinching eyes, introduces you to the teachings of the Buddha. It's not love at first sight, but it is recognition. You hear about dukkha suffering karma and compassion, and something in your blood, something ancestral and tired, finally exhale. You begin to meditate. Awkwardly. You, a man whose daily planner once included public executions and tiger hunts, now sit cross-legged under a fig tree, wondering if breathing slowly can undo genocide. It cannot. But it's a start. You issue a royal decree halting all unnecessary military campaigns. You reduce taxes. You pardon prisoners. And then this is real, you declare that even animals deserve respect. Slaughtering certain species becomes illegal. You personally adopt a meatless diet. The royal kitchens once filled with roasted game now serve lentils and mango slices. Palace chefs hate you. Elephants probably do not. But here's the thing. You don't just go vegetarian and vibe. You go full imperial Buddha. You decide that your personal transformation should be national policy. You aren't just going to be a better person, you're going to make everyone better. This is where it gets awkward. You start preaching moral principles to your people, nonviolence, honesty, tolerance, family values. You call it Dhamma, a blend of Buddhist and humanitarian ideals. And you want everyone to live by it. To spread the word, you carve your new philosophy into stone. Literally. Giant stone slabs polished smooth and chiseled with decrees about compassion and kindness pop up across the empire like very earnest billboards. One near present-day Delhi says, "All men are my children." Very sweet. Also, very controlling. Quirky fact of the day. You hire officials called Dhamma Mahamatras, a kind of ancient HR team for ethics. Their job roam the empire, promote moral behavior, check up on officials, and possibly lecture naughty nobles about being nicer to their mothers. Historians still argue whether this moral administration genuinely improved society, or just made everyone nod politely while secretly eating chicken and yelling at their in-laws. But the effort, oh, it was sincere. You even send envoys to faraway lands, Sri Lanka, Egypt, the Hellenistic kingdoms, bearing gifts and sermons. You're like a Buddhist Oprah. You get enlightenment, and you get enlightenment. Still, not everyone is on board. Some Brahmins grumble that you're undermining traditional Vedic practices. Some generals miss the glory days of stomping over borders. And some of your courtiers quietly think you've lost your imperial edge. But you feel clearer, lighter, maybe even awake. The elephants, now mostly unemployed from war, seem happier too. And so, dear Ashoka, you sit at the twilight of your bloodied youth, polishing a new kind of weapon wisdom carved in stone, carried on the wind, and carried by elephants who now bow instead of charge. You'd think that after a battle like Kalinga, the empire would take a nap. But no, you wake up the very next morning and decide it's time for a complete lifestyle rebrand. Out go the swords and drums. In come the incense and ethical monologues. You, Ashoka, begin crafting your legacy not through more wars, but through moral imperialism. A phrase that sounds like a contradiction, until you realize you're trying to turn the entire Maurya Empire into a wellness retreat with stone signage and elephant yoga instructors. First order of business, rewriting your job description. You're no longer Ashoka the Conqueror. Now you're Devanampya Piyadasi, which roughly translates to beloved of the gods, he who looks with affection. Kind of like if your LinkedIn profile suddenly said Chief Empathy Officer. Your advisors are confused, your generals are suspicious. But your stonemasons, oh, they're thriving. Because instead of delivering your royal messages on scrolls or papyrus like a normal despot, you decide to carve them into rock. Massive, immovable, exquisitely chiseled edicts that you plant all over the empire from the Himalayan foothills to the Tamil coast. These edicts are your TED Talks in stone. They cover everything from animal welfare and religious tolerance to how often children should respect their parents. It's like ancient public service announcements, but with a 900-pound word count and 0 skip button. Quirky detail. One edict includes a list of your own failings and regrets, how you wish you'd adopted the path of Dhamma earlier. Humble brag much. And then there's the elephant situation. See, back in the day, elephants were your battle buddies. You decorated them in bronze armor and had them trample rebel strongholds. But now that you're a reformed monarch on a spiritual journey, you need to retrain these trunked titans. So you invent what might be the most delightfully absurd foreign policy move in ancient history, elephant diplomacy. You send elephants not as war machines, but as ambassadors. Dignified, garlanded, trained elephants carrying gifts and royal messages to faraway kingdoms. It's hard to be mad at a ruler who sends you a 5-ton vegetarian diplomat wearing bells. The Ptolemies of Egypt got one. The Seleucid Greeks. They received elephants too. Even Sri Lanka got a diplomatic pachyderm delivered with an accompanying sermon and probably some mangoes. No one knows exactly what the elephants did once they arrived. Were they supposed to shake trunks with local royalty, trample corruption? Gently, historians still argue whether these diplomatic missions were symbolic peace offerings or just very elaborate flexes. Like, look how peaceful I am. I don't even invade anymore. I gift wrap elephants. Meanwhile, back home you start building. But not palaces or pleasure gardens. No, you're into stupas now, those dome-shaped Buddhist monuments that serve as relic shrines, meditation spaces, and reminders that impermanence is kind of the whole point. You commission thousands of them. Big ones, small ones hidden in forests, crowning hills, lining riverbanks. The empire begins to look less like a military machine and more like a stone galaxy of compassion. And you don't stop there. You build wells for travelers, shade trees along roads, and hospitals for humans and animals alike. That's right, veterinary clinics in the 3rd century BCE. Somewhere a limping goat praises your name. You also ban animal sacrifices in the court. Gone are the blood-soaked rituals. In their place, quiet chanting lotus flowers and very confused priests who now have to find new hobbies. Your court begins to resemble a spiritual retreat. Diplomats walk past monks. Generals meditate. Servants murmur sutras while polishing banisters. You even start scheduling regular tours of your empire to check that everyone's behaving nicely. These are called Dhamma Yatras. And yes, even your elephants go on tour. But not everyone is into the new vibe. Some nobles resent the shift from glory to guilt. Some soldiers feel useless in an empire where nobody invades anything anymore. And there are whispers, soft, persistent, that you've grown. Soft. But you ignore them. Instead, you commission a special edict just for the border regions. It says that even people who don't follow your beliefs should be respected, and that you, Ashoka, value all paths that encourage virtue. It's the 3rd century BCE equivalent of an all religions welcome bumper sticker. On a boulder, in Sanskrit, Prakrit Greek, and Aramaic. Yes, you go multilingual. You want every subject and visitor to understand your message, so you have translators chisel your edicts into languages they can actually read. There's even a famous bilingual inscription in modern-day Kandahar that features Greek and Aramaic proof that you, a subcontinental emperor, were preaching tolerance in a language Aristotle once spoke. Quirky aside, one of your edicts reminds people to be kind to servants and slaves, birds and fish, and even elderly parents. That last part hits a little too close to home when you realize your own sons are probably reading it with very forced enthusiasm. And now you, the once merciless conqueror, sit in your palace watching birds nest on temple roofs, dictating edicts to be carved into mountainsides, and occasionally sending a very polite elephant to a king whose name you can barely pronounce. The empire impossibly still holds together, maybe not by fear anymore, but by curiosity, wonder, a shared sense that perhaps the world can run on something other than violence. And you're finally sleeping better. You wake up one morning with a mango slice in your mouth and a realization your personal enlightenment is now public policy. That's right, you've gone from imperial conqueror to the world's most aggressively spiritual HR director. But don't worry, you're still Ashoka. You still have style. You just swap your sword for a chisel and your battle cries for sermons. And everywhere you go, there's this delightful hum of monks murmuring sutras and stonemasons mumbling about deadlines. You've become obsessed with making goodness visible. That means more stupas, more inscriptions, more everything. The empire is one giant stone tablet away from being a Buddhist Pinterest board. You begin sponsoring councils of monks to sort out doctrinal debates. Because of course, what's an empire without some internal theological squabbles? One particularly dramatic gathering is the Third Buddhist Council, which you fund and host like a very chill religious convention. There are whispered arguments over monastic discipline, debates over correct pronunciation of chants, and one monk who probably eats all the figs. You preside serene but firm, determined to unify the Sangha and cleanse it of corruption. Historians still argue whether you used the council as a tool to consolidate your power over religious institutions or genuinely wanted to preserve the purity of the Dharma. Maybe both. You were still a politician after all. Meanwhile, your favorite sons and daughters are beginning to look useful. You send your son Mahinda and daughter Sanghamitta, yes, your daughter, on a diplomatic and spiritual mission to Sri Lanka. Their job, spread the Dharma. Their tool, a cutting of the original Bodhi tree under which the Buddha attained enlightenment. Let's pause here. You send a piece of a tree across the ocean in the 3rd century BCE, and not just any piece, a sacred clipping treated like a royal passenger, carried on a ship, guarded like treasure, and planted with ceremony in Anuradhapura, Sri Lanka's ancient capital. To this day, that tree, the Sri Maha Bodhi, still grows, a literal living link to your reign, the only tree in the world with its own security guards and daily flower offerings. Back home, you're redefining what it means to be emperor. You start walking among your people barefoot in simple robes, no royal guards trailing. You eat what they eat well except the meat, listen to their woes, and hand out little nuggets of Dhamma wisdom like a fortune cookie machine that's recently gone vegan. Quirky moment. You supposedly released thousands of animals from royal pens and declared them citizens of the empire. The imperial flamingos were, one assumes, very confused. You also found hospitals not just for humans but for animals too. Elephant clinics, bird rehabilitation stations, ancient vets making house calls for injured monkeys. You're basically funding the world's first animal welfare non-profit. There's a sense of transformation rippling through the empire. Roads are being repaved not to move troops, but to help monks travel easier. Wells and rest stops are built for pilgrims. A minister is appointed just to ensure women are safe during religious festivals. Who are you, Ashoka? And yet under all this spiritual glow, the edge still flickers. You still sign edicts with imperial flair. You still insist they be carved into cliffs as if mountains themselves need reminding to be virtuous. One such inscription warns against corruption, cruelty, and excessive partying. The nobles naturally groan. You're not exactly popular with the party crowd anymore, or the hunters, or the priests of older religions who now find their temples overshadowed by Buddhist stupas with significantly more pigeons. But you're convinced if you can just get people to live by the Dhamma, the empire will endure not through force, but through ethics, through habit, through belief. Historians still argue whether this worked in the long term, or if your moral revolution was too idealistic for the real world. But in the short term, the empire is stable. Trade routes hum. Neighboring kingdoms send back polite letters thanking you for the elephants. And you are content. Almost. Because even now, as you chant in palace courtyards and sip saffron tea under murals of the Buddha, there's something unsettled in you. A whisper, a memory, Kalinga. You still see it in dreams, the smoke, the river, the silence, so you build another stupa, and another. It becomes a compulsion, not because the empire needs them, but because you do. Maybe if you build enough, you can stack them like stones on a riverbed and dam the guilt inside you. Maybe. One curious inscription appears during this time. It's a personal note carved in stone near a pilgrimage site. You write that although you've encouraged good deeds across your empire, you're not sure if they've had any effect. It's not regret. But it's close. You end the note with a wish that future kings should carry on the Dhamma and be less inclined to conquest and more inclined to kindness. And somewhere in the distance, a trained elephant snorts in agreement, wearing a flower crown and a soft smile. So about those elephants. You thought it was a one-time gesture, send a tusker or two abroad, impress the neighbors, maybe spark a diplomatic pen pal situation involving bananas and ivory carvings. But oh no. Elephant diplomacy becomes a thing, a signature move, a whole genre of foreign policy with trunk and tusk. Soon enough, every royal ambassadorial caravan includes at least one majestically perfumed, lavishly bejeweled elephant. They're dressed in embroidered fabrics with inscriptions on their sides and little golden bells tied around their ankles. Because if you're going to send an animal to charm the Greeks, you go all out. The Seleucid king Antiochus II reportedly receives a letter from you. The letter survives in fragments, and it's polite, philosophical, and packed with charm. Oh, and it arrives with an elephant. No better way to say namaste and let's be friends than a 5-ton animal who eats your palace garden before the handshake. Historians still argue whether these elephants were really symbols of peace or cleverly disguised ultimatums. Because let's face it, when a guy sends you a giant armored mammal as a gift, you're not entirely sure whether to thank him or raise your walls. But the truth is you mean it. You don't send the elephants to intimidate. You send them to demonstrate that power can be gentle, that your empire once soaked in blood is now scented with sandalwood and lotus petals. You even appoint officials to care for diplomatic elephants, their mental health diets, travel conditions. These creatures become walking symbols of the new Moria majestic, thoughtful, and very well fed. And it works. Trade routes blossom. Foreign dignitaries arrive not with war plans but with fruit baskets and flute players. Greek emissaries write home about your ethical governance, and yes, your extremely polite elephants. Back in the capital, you begin to institutionalize Dhamma into every branch of the bureaucracy. You're no longer content with just promoting morality, you're embedding it. You create a new class of royal officers, the Dhamma Mahamatras, to spread ethical teachings, mediate disputes, and check on the moral well-being of the population. Think of them as roving therapists with scrolls and sandals. Quirky fact: one of their duties was to ensure proper behavior during festivals, including urging restraint during drunken celebrations. This means that somewhere in the 3rd century BCE, a government official had to tell villagers to stop twerking during Diwali, or the ancient equivalent. You also set up systems for the care of prisoners, ordering that they be treated humanely, allowed visitation, and even granted time to reflect and reform. This from the same man who once allegedly had a torture palace. Growth. Meanwhile, you double down on stone as your medium of communication, not just for edicts, but for moral reminders, poetic reflections, and sometimes even your own personal doubts. One particularly touching inscription laments that despite all your efforts, some people still don't understand the Dhamma. You express hope that with time even they may awaken. It's almost sweet, this idea that the most powerful man in the known world is kept awake at night by the thought that someone somewhere might still be a jerk. But there's more to your empire than morality. You're still Ashoka, the administrator. You still manage water systems, oversee agriculture, maintain vast road networks complete with mile markers and shade trees. Thank you very much. You build hospitals not only for people but also for horses, birds, and elephants. Even your veterinarians get training. Yes, the empire hums along, but not without its tensions. Some Brahmin priests are uneasy. The imperial tilt toward Buddhism feels like favoritism. You assure them your Dhamma is inclusive, non-denominational, all-embracing, but they remember the times when their rituals lit every temple flame, not just some. And some in the army grumble. After all, peace is nice, but it doesn't exactly give them job security. The war elephants are doing yoga and PR appearances now. Swordsmiths are learning to make gardening tools. One officer tries to start a war just to feel something again. But you remain firm. You keep writing edicts, planting Bodhi trees, and sending out elephant ambassadors like oversized scented letters of goodwill. Historians still argue whether this version of governance, one based on ethics and stone inscriptions, was sustainable. Some believe it weakened the empire by softening its military edge. Others see it as an unprecedented moment of enlightened rule. But you don't care. You're too busy organizing a mass pilgrimage for monks complete with detailed itineraries, royal funding, and moral support. Your own version of Burning Man, but with more fasting and fewer glow sticks. In quiet moments, you still climb the palace stairs alone to look out over the river. You sip warm herbal tea. You listen to the distant chant of monks. You feel the empire breathing. And somewhere in a faraway land, a young prince sees one of your elephants bows respectfully and begins to ask questions about the Dharma. You smile. Because sometimes even the biggest messages travel best on 4 massive legs. You don't think of yourself as a control freak. You think of yourself as thorough. So when the empire needs reminding to behave, you don't send messengers or post flyers. No, you send carvers with chisels and deadlines. You get the idea one morning while chewing a tamarind biscuit. Why not turn the entire subcontinent into a library of virtue? Why let ideas just float in the air when you can hammer them into granite? And so begins the Stone Age of self-help. You pick cliffs, boulders, temple walls, and pillars as your blank slates. The inscriptions are called Ashokan edicts, and they're not small. Some are 10 feet tall. Some curve around mountaintops. Some stare down travelers like stony billboards whispering, "Be kind," or at least don't trample anyone today. The contents, everything from royal regrets to parenting tips. One edict encourages compassion for servants. Another reminds people to stop sacrificing goats on Tuesdays. One even details how to treat prisoners with dignity, complete with suggestions for clean bedding and early release on holidays. Yes, you essentially invent parole. And the languages. Oh, you go multilingual. Some edicts are in Prakrit, the people's tongue. Others are in Greek and Aramaic, especially in the northwest regions. That's right, your empire is so vast, parts of it still speak Alexander the Great's leftovers. You don't just tolerate this, you embrace it. You write moral philosophy in Greek, ensuring even the olive oil crowd gets your messages. Quirky fact. One Greek inscription in Kandahar addresses everyone, not just your subjects, with a heartfelt, "Thus speaks King Ashoka," like a newsletter but carved on a cliff. Historians still argue whether these foreign language edicts reflect a genuine attempt at multicultural outreach or were just meant to dazzle Hellenistic neighbors. Either way, they remain some of the oldest bilingual inscriptions ever discovered. Back home, your stonemason guild is overwhelmed. Some whisper that you've gone off the deep end, assigning mountains moral responsibility, asking rivers to listen closely. But you don't care. You even start inscribing animal welfare laws. That's right. Fish get protection. Ants are considered. You pass regulations about not castrating animals during festival season. The empire rolls its eyes, but you feel lighter. Meanwhile, the stupas. You cannot stop building them. These dome-shaped structures, part tomb, part monument, part cosmic antenna, begin dotting the landscape like giant spiritual marshmallows. You fund the great stupa at Sanchi, which later generations will recognize as one of the most iconic Buddhist structures in the world. And you don't just fund them, you standardize them. A bit like franchising, but for inner peace. Everywhere from Kashmir to Karnataka, builders follow the same circular base, the same Torana, gateways, the same whispering prayer paths. It's the Starbucks of sanctity minus the lattes. You make sure pilgrims have shade trees and rest stops. Monasteries are stocked with scrolls. Wells are dug along trade routes. If someone can't find peace in your empire, it's not for lack of effort on your part. Of course, some find your passion exhausting. The generals again complain. We used to conquer kingdoms, they say. Now we're gardening around sacred mounds. One noble compares your rule to being trapped in a never-ending school assembly. He is reassigned to a distant post. But you're undeterred. In one bold move, you ban animal sacrifices in the capital. Just flat out. No more goats on altars. No more chickens with existential crises. Some religious factions object, but you hold firm. After all, what's the point of peace if it only applies to humans? Quirky detail. You reportedly issue a special order to release all peacocks from royal enclosures. Historians aren't sure why. Maybe they looked too sad. Maybe they were squawking off-key. Maybe you just wanted one less thing in a cage. Meanwhile, you make it mandatory for noble families to study the Dhamma. Picture ancient aristocrats sighing as they recite moral verses while their tutors throw compassion-themed pop quizzes. You also institute moral festivals, state-sponsored events where people gather, chant, meditate, and listen to lectures about patience and hygiene. Somewhere a teenager carves graffiti that reads, "Dhamma is for nerds." You probably respond by carving an edict next to it about forgiveness. And all the while, your voice spreads, not through speeches but through stone, unchanging, weatherproof, the ancient world's version of set it and forget it. Travelers begin to recognize your work. Ah, they say squinting at a cliff. Here's another one of those be kind to fish speeches. But sometimes the stones say more. There's one edict, not famous, not poetic, that quietly asks rulers who come after you to not be cruel, not even to those who deserve it. It ends not with a command, but with a hope. That's the thing about you, Ashoka. You went from punishing cruelty to hoping for kindness, from burning cities to planting mango trees, from conquest to commas chiseled into granite. And whether or not your people follow the stones, the fact that you wrote them at all, that's what echoes. So now as you sit in the shade of yet another half-built stupa elephants snoring in the distance, stonemasons tapping away behind you, you wonder if this is enough. If maybe someone generations from now will read your stones and smile, and maybe they'll put down their sword. So there you are, sitting on the imperial porch with a fig in one hand and a philosophical headache in the other, and you have a sudden realization you're not just carving stone for your own people anymore. You're writing for the world. Because let's be honest, your empire's a melting pot. To the northwest, you've got Greeks and Persians chatting over lentil stew. To the south, Dravidian tribes with ancient customs. To the east, seafaring merchants with stories about shrimp that glow. Your empire is so diverse, even your elephants speak multiple dialects. So what do? You go full international. You commission edicts in foreign tongues, including Greek and Aramaic, carved into cliffs along the frontiers. It's one of the earliest known examples of state-sponsored multilingual communication. Imagine your local DMV signs, but chiseled into boulders, and urging people to be nicer to their mothers. One edict in Kandahar, modern-day Afghanistan, is especially charming. Written in graceful Greek script, it blends Buddhist morality with Stoic language, almost like you're trying to win Plato's approval. You urge self-restraint, virtue, and kindness, not as commandments, but as suggestions from a thoughtful neighbor. Historians still argue whether this outreach was ideological or practical. Were you genuinely seeking cross-cultural harmony, or just showing off your empire's range like a diplomatic Beyoncé? Either way it worked. Greek emissaries begin writing home about you. They describe a gentle emperor, an empire with no military ambitions, a court where monks outnumber generals, and yes, the elephants, always the elephants. Apparently, the novelty never wore off. Meanwhile, the edicts take on a life of their own. Travelers begin copying them onto scrolls. Monks memorize entire pillars worth of text. Kids play games where they pretend to be Dhamma officers busting their friends for impure thoughts. One child's punishment involves meditating in a corner and writing an essay on why gossip is harmful. And your bureaucracy. Oh, it adapts fast. You assign local translators to ensure every corner of the empire understands your rules. No subject can say, "Sorry, didn't speak Prakrit." You've now got edicts in at least 5 scripts, including Brahmi Kharosthi, Greek, and Aramaic. Somewhere in a distant mountain pass, a goat herder squints at a moral lesson he doesn't quite get, but he feels something. Back in court, you call for regular reports, not on crop yields or tax revenue. Okay, maybe those too, but on moral behavior. Are people being patient? Are family members respecting elders? Has anyone yelled at a peacock recently? You encourage interfaith dialogue, promoting understanding between Buddhists, Jains, Brahmins, and even Greek philosophers who show up with togas and very loud opinions. You insist that truth has many forms like water poured into different vessels, and you want your empire to be the potluck where all those vessels hang out and exchange recipes. Quirky detail, you once issued an edict encouraging people to treat servants, teachers, and ascetics with equal respect. A scandalously progressive notion, especially for that era. Somewhere a palace janitor probably did a little dance after reading it. But despite your outreach, not everyone's thrilled. Some see your moral push as meddling. Ashoka wants to teach us how to breathe now, one merchant jokes. Others resent the shift from ritual to ethics, from ceremony to simplicity. The old Vedic order grumbles, even as your stonemasons carve their complaints into marginalia. They hope no one will notice. Still, the empire holds. Why? Maybe because you don't punish the skeptics. You don't force conversion. You never make Buddhism a state religion. You encourage but never coerce. That's your genius. You rule not with iron but with example. You ask your people to try. To fail, reflect, and try again. You're the emperor who leaves the door open for better behavior, even if nobody walks through it today. You know change takes time. So you invest in education. You fund monasteries that become centers of learning, not just prayer. You send scholars across the empire to teach ethics, logic, and mindfulness. You don't just want followers, you want thinkers. And somewhere in the empire, a young monk begins composing a text in Pali, inspired by your edicts explaining the 4 noble truths. That text will survive, be translated, be whispered across centuries. You've started something. Of course you don't live to see how far it travels. But right now in your study chamber surrounded by scrolls and the soft scent of sandalwood, you close your eyes and listen. A monk chants in Pataliputra. A mason taps away in Sri Lanka. A child recites your edict near Kandahar in sing-song Greek. And somewhere beyond your reach, a kingdom you'll never visit receives a peaceful banana-loving elephant with a golden sash and a message from a man they'll never meet but never quite forget. If you thought spiritual transformation meant family harmony, think again. You Ashoka, the emperor who banned blood sacrifices, who funded bird hospitals, who sent elephants on diplomatic spa retreats, still can't convince your own kids to clean up after themselves, let alone follow the Dhamma without muttering. Raising royal children is never simple, but raising royal children while transforming an empire into a moral playground. That's a recipe for drama sandal throwing, and at least one stupa being graffitied with the phrase, "Dhamma is boring." Your children number, well, no one's exactly sure. Estimates range from 5 to a couple dozen. Record-keeping in the palace nursery was apparently handled by someone with both bad memory and worse handwriting. But 2 names do rise above the fog of history, your son Mahinda and daughter Sanghamitta. Now, unlike many of your courtly kids who enjoy silk pillows and mango feasts, Mahinda and Sanghamitta actually listen. You trained them not for war or intrigue, but for spiritual service. They become monks, yes, even Sanghamitta. In an era where daughters are usually expected to smile politely and marry well, she becomes a Buddhist nun-philosopher and ambassador of enlightenment. Quirky detail. Sanghamitta is often credited with introducing Buddhism to Sri Lanka, not just in sermons, but by bringing along a living sapling of the sacred Bodhi tree. Transported carefully by boat across the sea, protected by guards and chants, and greeted like royalty. It's like sending a sacred cutting through ancient FedEx with enlightenment included. When they arrive in Sri Lanka, Mahinda and Sanghamitta don't just preach, they change the kingdom. The king of Anuradhapura, Devanampia Tissa, is so impressed he converts on the spot, donates land for monasteries, and starts referencing your elephant gifts in official correspondence. Historians still argue whether this rapid conversion was spiritual awe or savvy geopolitics. But the Bodhi tree takes root, and so does the Dhamma. Back in the imperial palace, though, things are less tranquil. Some of your other sons aren't thrilled with this whole "dad loves monks more than us" dynamic. At least one of them, Kunala, is embroiled in a tale so dramatic it reads like a soap opera carved into limestone. Kunala, the story goes, was your heir, apparent, brilliant, handsome, noble, until a jealous stepmother allegedly schemes to blind him so her son can take the throne. She forges an edict, sends it to the provincial governor, and Kunala, faithful and duty-bound, follows the order to blind himself. Yes, he blinds himself. Voluntarily. Because in true Ashokan fashion, he believes that obedience to the emperor, even a mistaken one, is the highest virtue. Now pause here. Imagine sitting in your meditation chamber sipping herbal tea when a servant walks in and says, "Your son's back." Oh, and he's blind now. Also, he says you ordered it. Do you breathe deeply? Do you rage? Do you carve an edict that says, "Stop forging my signature, please"? We don't know exactly how you responded. But Kunala is not executed. Instead, he becomes a respected spiritual figure, blind but insightful, like a wandering Dhamma oracle. In some versions, he even composes hymns. But the power struggle this incident unleashes, it's real. You try to settle things by naming your grandson Dasharatha as your successor. This frustrates pretty much everyone who isn't Dasharatha. Intrigues bubble, support shifts. Your once harmonious vision for a Buddhist empire starts to look a little cracked. It turns out you can send elephants across oceans, but you can't keep peace at the dinner table. You hold council after council. You summon your children. You speak of impermanence, compassion, selflessness. Some listen. Some nod while plotting how to redecorate the throne room. But amid the chaos, you cling to the quiet victories. Monasteries flourish. Pilgrimages increase. Foreign monks arrive to study in your empire's universities. The Dhamma remains a living force, even if your bloodline feels more like an overcooked noodle. Quirky aside. One of your later edicts features a fatherly tone, urging people to respect their elders, be kind to animals, and avoid vanity. It reads suspiciously like a letter to your own kids, possibly carved in all caps. Historians still argue whether your family troubles contributed to the gradual decline of Mauryan authority after your death. Some say too much energy went to spiritual reform, not enough to dynastic stability. Others believe your model was too advanced, too idealistic, and your heirs just weren't up to the task. But here's the thing, even if your kids didn't always obey, they carried your story. Mahinda and Sanghamitta planted more than a tree. They planted a memory of you as the emperor who turned away from war, who tried to turn ethics into statecraft, who loved his elephants and his regrets equally. And somewhere in a quiet monastery beneath a fig tree, a novice monk repeats your name with awe. Not because you ruled, but because you tried. By now you've traded your imperial robes for simpler garb, dyed in natural hues, breathable, and let's be honest, slightly itchy. But it's a small price to pay for moral clarity. You've stopped hunting, you've stopped warring, and you've basically stopped attending banquets unless the only items on the menu are lentils fruit and spiritual humility. You've become the ancient embodiment of clean eating before it was cool. Your royal kitchens no longer roast deer or peacocks. Instead, they offer fig chutney barley gruel and the occasional sermon with dessert. But it's not just what you eat, it's how you live now. You wake up before sunrise, you meditate, you chant, you read scriptures. Sometimes you personally oversee the release of caged birds. And every so often, when the guilt of past conquests stirs in your chest like a thundercloud, you walk to a stupa and sit in the shade for hours, counting your breaths and your regrets. Your transformation isn't just private. It's written in stone. Remember, you've literally carved your confessions into cliffs. One inscription near the Lumbini site, the Buddha's birthplace, records how you visited the spot, made donations, and declared it tax-free. Generous, yes, but also quietly tragic. Why? Because you're no longer trying to impress the gods. You're trying to atone. Quirky moment. You once ordered a morality audit of the royal household. Servants were evaluated for their ethical behavior. Cooks were rated on kindness, not seasoning. One official was fired for rudeness to a goose. Even your animals live differently now. The palace elephants no longer wear war armor. They wear flower garlands. They're bathed with scented oils. Visitors ask to pet them like holy relics. One royal elephant becomes so docile, it reportedly kneels when monks walk by. You name him Karuna, compassion. And then there's the letter to the forest tribes. Somewhere in your later years, you commission an edict directed specifically at the tribal populations on the frontier, often considered untamed or uncivilized by other rulers. But not by you. You write, "Even those who live in the wilderness are my children. I desire their happiness and safety just as I desire it for all others." Historians still argue whether this was sincere empathy or a clever strategy to pacify the borders without sending troops. But it feels genuine. You weren't trying to civilize them, you were trying to say, "You matter too." Meanwhile, your diet continues to simplify. You give up most rich foods. You reportedly live on fruits, vegetables, and occasional rice cakes. You make public announcements encouraging kindness to kitchen animals, and even ask the butchers in distant cities to at least pause their knives on festival days. At court, this is confusing. The nobles still crave a good roast. The generals feel spiritually irrelevant. And the chefs? They're losing their minds. One reportedly resigns in protest, citing excessive carrot-based mandates. But the people notice, and some follow. In remote villages, festivals once marked by firecrackers and animal sacrifice now feature lanterns, prayer circles, and pots of sticky rice. Monks travel safely across provinces where they'd once been robbed. A child somewhere buries a dead squirrel and whispers your name. You've become the moral compass of the empire, though you walk softly and rarely give direct orders now. Instead, your voice comes through edicts, example, and the occasional polite elephant ambassador. You even start writing edicts less like proclamations and more like personal diary entries etched in stone, of course. In one you say, "In the past I did many wrongs, but now I desire that my sons and grandsons continue the path of the Dhamma. If they fail, I do not want glory. I only want progress toward goodness." And there it is, that ache, that lingering thread through all your moral reforms guilt. It doesn't haunt you, not exactly, but it shadows you like the early morning light that comes through stupa gates and casts silhouettes of monks in meditation. Quirky detail, You're rumored to have once attempted to fund a school for ethical storytelling, a place where parables, not punishments, taught children right from wrong. It never caught on. Kids preferred stories with monkeys and demons. You approved reluctantly. Back in the palace, you spend more time alone. The hallways that once echoed with war councils now carry the sound of distant chants, quiet sweeping, and the occasional elephant sneeze. You decline invitations to festivals unless they involve no fire, no sacrifice, and no bragging. You keep a bowl of river stones near your sleeping quarters. Every night you place one in a jar if you believe you lived well that day. The jar is never full, but you keep trying. Historians still argue whether your spiritual journey was authentic transformation or strategic self-preservation, whether your embrace of Buddhism was a genuine change of heart or just a clever post-Kalinga PR campaign. But you know the truth. And so does the empire, especially the quiet parts, the rural edges, the dusty roads where no generals ride, but where a stupa gleams in the sun and a stone edict whispers, "Be better," even if no one sees it. You never asked for a fan club, but oh, you got one. As your Dhamma spreads across provinces, valleys, and mountain passes, something strange begins to happen. You become a legend in your own lifetime. And not in the cool battle scars and sword fights kind of way. No, people start adoring you for things like humility. Villagers pass stories about your moral edicts, but with every retelling the facts get fuzzier, and the elephants get twice as wise. In one version, your elephant Karuna bows before a tiger and teaches it non-violence. In another, you levitate slightly during meditation. You don't correct any of it. Why would you? It's nice to be remembered as the emperor who floated a bit. You begin receiving letters from rulers in distant lands, kings and governors who thank you for the elephants, of course, but also for the philosophy, the ethical tone, the peace. Imagine that foreign leaders writing not to demand tribute, but to compliment your character. It's a new form of diplomacy, not backed by swords or fleets, but by stories and respect. Quirky fact. One of your foreign letters apparently included a recipe for mung bean stew. You always had a soft spot for good digestion and gentle moral metaphors. Meanwhile, at home, pilgrimages explode. People travel for days, weeks, even to visit your inscriptions. They treat them like shrines. Children try to trace your signature. One man reportedly kissed a rock and thanked it for improving his marriage. You consider putting up a sign that says it's just an edict, but then again, maybe not. Maybe people need this. Maybe they need to believe that kindness can be carved into the very bones of the earth. Historians still argue whether this admiration was genuine or more like ancient propaganda. After all, you had the tools to shape your legacy literally, and your PR team included an army of masons with no character limit. But even your critics struggle to find scandal. The worst they can say, Ashoka doesn't party anymore. Which is true. You've officially quit festivals that involve loud music meat skewers or boastful poems. You do, however, approve of quiet gatherings with lamplit chanting and boiled peanuts. Still, a side effect of sainthood is that you become harder to talk to. Your advisors approach with hesitation, now worried they'll interrupt a meditation or trigger a lecture on right speech. One court official accidentally yawns during a sermon and spends the next week assigned to planting banyan trees in silence. And the sycophants. Oh, they multiply. Everyone suddenly claims to be living according to the Dhamma, even if they just skipped kicking a cat. Ministers start quoting your edicts at dinner parties. One noble has your face painted on his elephant. You ban that immediately. You begin to suspect that some love your message, and some love the power it brings. So you tighten the system. You appoint inspectors to check that officials aren't using Dhamma as a weapon. You make humility mandatory in court reports. At one point, you order nobles to practice silence for 1 hour a day, which backfires spectacularly when a tax collector misunderstands and forgets to collect anything for a week. And yet, there's something beautiful in the absurdity. You pass through a village one morning and see a boy sweeping the path ahead of his grandmother. "Because the emperor said to honor elders," he explains shyly. Your elephant pauses. You smile. You leave behind an extra fruit basket. Quirky detail. A traveling bard composes an entire ballad titled "The Emperor Who Apologized," and it becomes wildly popular. The chorus includes a reference to your famous regret over Kalinga, rhymed somewhat questionably with papaya. Still, you feel uneasy. Because fan clubs fade, stone erodes, even elephants die. And somewhere deep in your bones, you know the empire is not forever. You begin to wonder, is your message strong enough to survive the fall of your empire? You think about the great kings before you, conquerors, rulers with cities named after them, coins bearing their faces. And you realize no one sings songs about their kindness. So maybe this is your real conquest. Not land, not wealth, but a tiny glowing idea that gentleness can outlive steel. To test this, you start a new initiative, moral correspondence. You order your scribes to send copies of your edicts, especially the gentler ones, to monasteries, temples, and schools across the empire. You want children to grow up hearing your words, not as law, but as lullaby. You simplify some texts, add little stories. One about a turtle who gives away his shell. Another about a crow who shares fruit with a monkey. They're basically Buddhist fables with just enough weird animal behavior to keep kids interested. It works. Somewhere a novice monk adds your words to his morning chant. A grandmother retells your story beside a flickering lamp. A child learns that the most powerful emperor of their time wanted nothing more than for them to be kind. And you sit on your veranda as the sun sets behind another stupa. The fruit trees rustle. The elephants snore. You watch a mason chisel your final sentence into stone. You don't need applause or banners or even another fan club. You just hope someone reads it and tries. There's a peculiar peace that settles over you in your later years. Not the peace of sleep, but of someone who's finally stopped chasing. You, Ashoka, once raced across battlefields on the backs of war elephants. Now you walk barefoot through monastery gardens, pausing to admire butterflies and the way dew clings to lotus petals. It's a dramatic shift. Less adrenaline, more chlorophyll. But don't be fooled, your mind is just as busy. You're still emperor. You still receive reports, sign decrees, and consult with ministers. You just now prefer to do so in the courtyard of a stupa with a clay cup of tamarind tea and a slightly judgmental pigeon watching from above. You've grown older, and with age comes reflection and questions. Big ones. Was it worth it? Has your transformation truly changed the empire? Has your regret rewritten the memory of your violence? You don't get neat answers, but the world around you offers signs. Some subtle, some carved in stone, some shaped like elephants in ceremonial flower hats. Like the network of Buddhist missions you've sponsored over the decades. From the heart of your empire to distant lands. Southeast Asia. Central Asia, the Mediterranean monks carry your messages, not with flags or force, but with quiet dignity and bundles of scriptures tied with twine. One delegation reports that a king in Syria read your edict on tolerance aloud to his court. Another says a group of Greek philosophers debated your teachings over pomegranates and ended by bowing to a traveling monk. Quirky aside, there are rumors that one of your elephants refused to board a ship, preferring instead to sit on the docks and eat dried figs. A week of coaxing later, it still wouldn't move. Eventually, the elephant is declared enlightened in its own way and left in peace. Back home, temples bloom like wildflowers. Each one a marker of your impact, not just spiritually, but architecturally. You've set new styles, new rituals, and new rhythms. Some stupas even bear your name carved at the base, but always modestly. You insist on being remembered not as a god, but as a man who tried. Yet palace life remains complicated. Your children are grown. Some follow your path. Some very much do not. You hear whispers of excess, of provincial governors abusing their posts, of nobles quietly reinstating animal sacrifices in rural temples, figuring you're too busy meditating to notice. And they're right. You're older. Your energy wanes. You no longer charge into council chambers or write a dozen edicts before breakfast. You let things go, not out of apathy but acceptance. Historians still argue whether your latter years were marked by detachment or fatigue, whether you withdrew as a form of wisdom or simply wore out. Either way, you become less of a ruler and more of a presence, like incense smoke. Still here, still fragrant but harder to grasp. You begin to spend more time by the river near Pataliputra. It's quiet there. Children play. Merchants wash their wares. Monks collect water for rituals. You sometimes join them cupping the cool liquid in your palm and whispering sutras to the current. You start writing shorter edicts, fewer words, softer tone. One simply says, "Let all beings be free from fear." Just that. No fancy declarations, no royal flourishes, just a simple wish etched into a boulder by the riverside where fishermen and ferrywomen will pass it for centuries. Quirky detail. You reportedly commissioned a stupa in complete silence. No drums, no proclamations, no ceremony. Workers showed up one morning, the materials already there, and simply began to build. When it was done, you meditated beside it, and never spoke of it again. It becomes known as the Still Stupa. Some say it was your quiet apology to Kalinga. Others say it was just your favorite place to nap. You never say. Your courtiers grow anxious. Without your firm hand, the empire seems less stable. Borders are nudged. Trade slows in some regions. And your chosen successor, young Dasharatha, is charming but distracted. He's more interested in palatial renovations than philosophical continuity. You offer advice, but only when asked. You've learned painfully that even the most carefully carved edict cannot force someone to be virtuous. It can only invite them. So instead, you write one last message. You gather your scribes. You dictate slowly, clearly. The message is not for your ministers, not for your family, not even for your people. It's for whoever finds it next. You say, in this world glory fades, statues crumble, but kindness once given echoes. Be slow to anger, quick to forgive. And if you rule, rule as if your mother is watching. You have them carve it onto a pillar at the edge of the empire, far from palaces or fanfare. Just a road, a breeze, and a curious traveler who someday might stop to read it. And maybe they'll smile, and maybe they'll keep walking a little softer in their steps. You never actually hear the word legacy. No one in the 3rd century BCE really talks that way. But you feel it a weight like a whisper behind every edict, every stupa, every mango tree planting. You feel time narrowing, folding around you like a well-worn cloak. And so you begin to look backward. You think about your grandfather, Chandragupta, the empire builder who forged a realm out of fragmented kingdoms. He ruled with iron discipline, took advice from master strategists like Kautilya, and left behind a land bound by order. You think about your father Bindusara, quiet, competent, unmemorable. A placeholder between greatness and, well, whatever you turned out to be. You know people will talk about you, Ashoka. Some will remember you as the butcher of Kalinga, others as the great patron of Buddhism, still others as that guy who had moral messages carved into cliffs. And they'll all be right. But that's what bothers you. Because you're not one thing. You're not one moment. You are a man made of conflict, contradiction, course corrections. Historians still argue whether your conversion was genuine or political, whether your pacifism weakened the Maurya military machine, whether your spiritual policies diluted administrative strength. Some even speculate that your Buddhist reforms alienated elite segments of society and set the stage for the empire's eventual disintegration. But you know better. You know that empires fade no matter how they're built. What matters isn't how wide your borders stretched, but how many lives softened under your reign. So you walk the palace gardens slower these days, leaning on a carved staff. You listen more, speak less. You ask your advisors how people in distant provinces are doing, not just their production quotas, but their spirits. You want to know if they sleep peacefully, if they quarrel less, if their elephants are still wearing flower crowns. Quirky. Aside, one noble tries to impress you with a gift, a war chariot repurposed into a mobile stupa. You smile politely, and later have it converted into a traveling vegetarian soup kitchen instead. You spend your evenings reading, yes, reading. Your scholars have begun transcribing teachings onto palm leaves and cloth scrolls. You pore over them, fascinated by the poetry of it all. Sutras that drift like fog across the page. Philosophers who argue that even good deeds done for ego are less pure than quiet compassion. You start writing poetry yourself, short verses usually about birds or old regrets. Nothing that makes it into inscriptions, just small things. Left behind on scraps of bark folded into prayer offerings or whispered into the air before sleep. One evening, you hold an impromptu audience with students from a monastery. They're young, eager, fidgety. You sit with them cross-legged, drink warm barley tea, and ask if they believe in the Dhamma. One boy nods with such certainty your heart aches. Another shrugs and says he just likes the food. You laugh. That's enough. Because belief doesn't have to look grand. Sometimes it's just showing up, just listening, just pausing before you say something cruel. That too is Dhamma. You begin to decline invitations to formal functions. You skip ceremonies. You avoid parades. The empire hums without you at the center of it. And you realize that's the point. You've spent years trying to build a kingdom of ethics, not ego. Now it's time to see if it stands without your hand. And yet in the quiet, doubts creep in. You wonder whether your grandchildren will keep the path, whether future rulers will prioritize peace over pride, whether the edicts will still be legible 1,000 years from now, or if the wind and rain will scrub away your words like chalk on stone. So you hedge your bets. You request one final stupa to be built, not large, not ornate, but placed along a lonely road where pilgrims often rest. Inside you leave no relic, no gem, no statue, just a single stone tablet, blank except for one line, "May those who pass here remember kindness." No name, no title, just a wish. Quirky fact. You insist the stupa be built without ceremony. No musicians, no officials, just a few workers and a sleepy elephant watching from the trees. Years later, travelers will stumble across it, unsure who built it, but feeling somehow that they should sit quietly for a while. And perhaps that's all you've ever wanted. Not temples in your name, not statues that birds will soil. Just a little more stillness in the world. Just a moment where someone chooses not to strike, not to shout, not to turn away. And as the sun sets, you walk the colonnade one last time, the wind tugging at your robe, the scent of sandalwood in the air, your fingers trailing across the cool surface of a stone that bears your regrets, your wisdom, and your hope. You don't know if it will last, but you know it was worth writing. It comes quietly, as all things do at the end. There are no trumpets, no final edict carved in gold. Just the steady creak of palace shutters in the wind, the soft thud of an old monk's sandals in the corridor, and the distant call of a temple bell echoing down the riverbanks of Pataliputra. You, Ashoka, are nearing your final season. Your joints ache, your breaths lengthen. The world moves a little faster around you now, though no one dares to rush you. Even the elephants seem to tread more gently when they pass your window. They know. You've stopped giving formal audiences. Ministers deliver scrolls which you review while sipping warm broth. You mark some with little dots, your shorthand for good effort. But remember to be kind. Some documents you simply return with a leaf tucked inside. They know what that means. Let it go. The courtiers whisper about succession, about Dasharatha, about whether the Dhamma will last beyond your bones. But you don't interrupt. You've learned finally that not everything needs your hand to survive. Instead, you watch. You watch pilgrims streaming into the city, their feet dusty but their eyes full of reverence. You watch children chant verses you once mumbled under your breath. You watch monks in saffron robes teaching farmers how to build meditation huts beside their fields. And sometimes you watch nothing at all, just clouds passing, just water dripping into a stone basin. Quirky aside. One morning your personal elephant Karuna, now older than many of your ministers, refuses his fruit platter until a nearby monk finishes his chant. Everyone laughs. You cry. Not from sadness, but because even your elephants understand timing now. You dream more often these days. Not the wild dreams of youth where you trample kingdoms and plant flags. These are softer. You dream of cool caves, of fig trees, of rivers without names. Sometimes you hear the Kalinga battlefield in reverse swords slipping from hands, soldiers walking backward, wounds sealing shut. You don't believe in omens, but you do believe in echoes. And you've started hearing them everywhere. Historians still argue whether your final years were lonely. Some accounts claim you withdrew too much, that your austerity became isolation. Others say you were surrounded by disciples and animals and gentler kinds of power. But the truth, you felt both. Alone and not alone. Empty and full. You begin giving things away. Your ornaments, your robes, even your staff. You give your ring to a gardener who once caught you sneaking mangoes, to remember the sweet things you say. You request a final visit to the great stupa at Sanchi, but your body can't make the journey. So you ask for a small replica to be built in the garden, nothing fancy. Just a mound of stone, a ring of pebbles, and a single carved phrase, "Truth speaks in silence." The nobles are confused. One asks if it's a riddle. You smile and say nothing. Your grandson Dasharatha visits often now. He asks about ruling, about responsibility, about how to keep people honest. You offer no lectures, only stories. You tell him about the time you nearly exiled a minister for smuggling figs only to find out he was feeding a starving child. Or the time a village accused a cow of disrespecting a shrine. You'd ordered an investigation only to discover the cow was sacred in that region and had been elected mayor in a symbolic festival. You tell Dasharatha the one lesson that took you decades to learn. Power is loud. Wisdom whispers. If you can hear the whisper, follow it. Quirky footnote. You write a final haiku-like verse, scratched lightly into a wooden beam above your door. It reads, "Rain falls one drop at a time. Even mountains melt. No one finds it until long after you're gone. When the day finally arrives, the skies are overcast. A gentle rain dusts the rooftops. The palace is quiet, almost reverent. Your breathing slows like a receding tide. You ask for no ceremony, no statues, no mourning songs, only a single wish: let them live kindly. You close your eyes to the sound of Karuna snoring outside, and somewhere in the distance, a stupa bell rings once. Then again, you do not wake. The empire doesn't collapse overnight. Dasharatha ascends. The edicts still stand. The elephants still walk the trade routes bearing gifts and stories. For a while, the world remembers you exactly as you hoped. And even after the empire shrinks when your name fades from coinage and your descendants fade into footnotes, the stones remain. They wait. Until one day, centuries later, a British archaeologist stumbles across a pillar in the middle of nowhere, dusts off the inscription and reads, "All men are my children." And in that moment, the world meets you again. Centuries pass, as centuries do, quietly at first, then all at once. Your Empire Ashoka begins to unravel, not with flames and invasions, but with forgetting. The Maurya line continues for a short while under Dasharatha, then peters out like incense smoke on a breezeless morning. The provinces once bound by stone edicts and shared Dhamma drift apart. No one tears down your stupas, they just stop adding to them. Monasteries lose state funding, pilgrims dwindle. Ministers stop quoting your moral edicts in meetings and start quoting tax ledgers again. Somewhere a war elephant gets re-armored. Somewhere else a goat is sacrificed with quiet apologies. Historians still argue whether this decline was due to poor leadership, lack of military readiness, or simply the natural ebb of all things. Empires, after all, are human things, as fragile as sand castles and about as permanent. But your story? Ashoka, well, your story has other ideas. Even as the empire fades, even as your name slips from the tongues of kings, your stones remain. Some are covered by vines. Some are knocked over by storms. Some are used as building materials for houses, bridges, even outhouses. One edict ends up upside down in a goat pen. Another is repurposed as a road marker until someone notices the ancient script and decides maybe it's not the best spot for cart traffic. Quirky detail. In one village, a stone pillar with your edict was mistaken for a magical rain charm. Locals would tie scarves around it and dance during droughts. The pillar didn't complain. For nearly 2,000 years, you are more myth than man. Mentions of a just emperor appear in Buddhist texts, but no one connects the dots. Your Greek inscriptions fade. Your name is no longer shouted in palaces, it is murmured in monasteries quietly, like a rumor the wind forgot. Until the British arrive. Yes, them. In the 19th century, a generation of colonial archaeologists, equal parts curious, arrogant, and bored, begin uncovering India's ancient past. They stumble across something unusual: polished stone pillars too finely carved for vanity-bearing messages that seem oddly gentle. They dig more. They translate. They connect the stones. A name emerges again, Ashoka, sometimes written as Asoka, or Devanampiya, or Piyadasi. At first, no one believes it's the same person. Could the man who ordered the massacre of Kalinga really be the same one who preached compassion to ants? Historians still argue. Of course they do. But the evidence mounts, edict after edict, Greek Prakrit Brahmi, from Afghanistan to Andhra Pradesh. The pieces fit. The emperor who disappeared into time steps out of the mist again, not as a conqueror, but as a moral philosopher in stone. And suddenly you're everywhere again. Textbooks describe you as India's greatest ruler. Buddhists revere you as the second greatest benefactor of the Dharma after the Buddha himself. Your pillar with the lion capital becomes the official emblem of modern India. It's on the currency, the passports, the government seal. Not bad for a guy who used to need translators for his elephants. Quirky aside, tourists now pose for selfies beside your edicts. Some wear Team Ashoka shirts. Somewhere a stupa hosts a yoga retreat with artisanal kombucha and someone playing singing bowls in the background. You would roll your eyes. Softly. But something deeper endures. Your ideas, your soft-spoken empire of ethics, they resonate. Even in a world of jet engines and blue screens, people pause at your stones. They run fingers along the worn letters. They squint at your simple instructions. Be kind. Be honest. Forgive. Feed the birds. One teacher in Nepal builds an entire ethics curriculum around your edicts. A documentary filmmaker compares you to Marcus Aurelius. A poet in Sri Lanka writes sonnets addressed to your pillar in Anuradhapura. And somewhere a child hears your story. Not the whole empire bit, not even the elephant diplomacy. Just the part where you made mistakes, felt terrible, and tried to make it right. That's enough. Because in a world that often glamorizes power, conquest, and vengeance, you offer a different kind of heroism, the kind that whispers, I was wrong. I changed. You can too. And maybe that's the real empire you built. Not one of stone or tribute or borders, but one of second chances. It took a few millennia, but they found you, Ashoka. They remember. And this time they read your words not with trembling obedience, but with a little awe, a little hope. And maybe, just maybe, they put down their sword. And so now, Ashoka, we reach the part of the story where no one's quite sure where you are, but your voice never stops talking. The last of your bones have long since mingled with soil, perhaps under a banyan tree, or somewhere on the path between two half-forgotten stupas. But your words, they're louder than ever. A monk in Cambodia reads an ancient copy of the edicts. A schoolteacher in Delhi explains the lion capital of Sarnath as more than just a national emblem. It's a roar of peace. A university student in London writes a thesis arguing that you were one of the earliest moral political philosophers, a proto-Kant, with a fondness for fruit. And someone is still arguing about your elephants. Historians still argue whether your diplomatic elephants were symbolic gifts of goodwill, veiled threats of power, or just impressively large packages with really complicated shipping logistics. But regardless of motive, one thing is clear: no one forgot them. Modern India has now preserved and digitized many of your inscriptions. Schoolchildren visit museums where your pillars rise like ancient lighthouses of stone. Artists paint you in gold robes, riding a white elephant made of clouds. You're less a king, now, more a cultural archetype, the ruler who ruled his heart. Quirky aside, in Japan there's a manga adaptation of your life. You're drawn with enormous eyes and impeccable robes, dispensing wisdom between panels of flashbacks to your more, turbulent years. In one scene you cry into a bowl of rice. It's moving, also possibly inaccurate, and yet it fits. Because your story, Ashoka, is one of human transformation, not perfection, not sainthood, but change. You started your reign with blood under your fingernails and a glint of conquest in your eyes. You ended it with your hands folded, your voice soft, and the empire leaning slightly more toward the light. But here's the most absurd part: you never demanded to be remembered. You didn't carve your name into the biggest buildings. You didn't commission statues of yourself on chariots crushing enemies. You didn't surround your tomb with gold and guards and riddles. You didn't even ask for a fancy funeral. You asked for compassion. You asked for people to treat each other like they mattered. You asked for, let's be honest, a lot of incredibly specific animal welfare policies. And yes, you possibly went overboard with the no animal sacrifice ever thing. But hey, at least peacocks finally caught a break. You faded without fanfare. And yet centuries later your stones still catch sunlight. Your lions still stand tall. Your message chiseled, scattered, and once nearly erased still gets read. And here's what people find when they read it. glory fades. But goodness echoes. All men are my children. If you must conquer, conquer yourself. These aren't battle cries. They're bedtime stories for empires. The soft hum of a king who learned to rule from within. You taught the world that strength can bow, that even war elephants can be retrained to carry peace across continents. And now your words roll across smartphone screens, whispered in podcasts, projected in classrooms, stamped on currency. They live in a dozen languages, from ancient Greek to TikTok subtitles. Because you gave the world something rarer than gold, rarer than empire. You gave it permission to try again. And that's the legacy that lasts. Not perfection, not domination, just the quiet insistence that there's always another way. So now, as the night settles and the story ends, you feel your body soften into the mattress, your limbs heavy, your thoughts drifting like silk over still water. Ashoka's elephants have wandered off into dreams, their bells gently clinking through forests that no longer echo with war cries. Somewhere a stupa gleams beneath a full moon. Somewhere a stone pillar whispers to the wind, "Be gentle even now." Let that image settle over you. Let the soft cadence of stone and silence replace whatever noise the day left behind. The world outside your window may still be spinning with urgency, but here in this moment you've slipped into a timeline where things move slowly, intentionally, with care. You are walking through the gardens of an old empire, the air fragrant with sandalwood and ripe mangoes. A quiet place, a kind place. Ashoka's message wasn't to be flawless, it was to try. And if you're trying even just a little, then maybe you're already part of that ancient ripple, the one that began when a warrior laid down his sword and started carving kindness into the bones of the earth. Now breathe, let go. The story will wait here for you tomorrow and the day after, carved into time like a promise. You did enough today. You can rest. Sweet dreams.